Ladies and gentlemen,
Good evening.
are you ready?
Okay, here we go.
You're listening to the Deal Room Podcast. Join us as we bring you the inside scoop on business sales and acquisitions. Get across trends in the area and hear the industry's best recount their real-life tips, traps, and experiences. Now, here's your host, Joanna Oakey.
Hi, it's Joanna Oakey here, and welcome back to the Deal Room Podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. Now, today we are back with the Real Estate Institute of Queensland's CEO, Antonia Mercorella, for the second and final part of our two-part series on the exciting world of business broking. Now, in part one, if you missed it, we explored the latest trends and changes in the industry. Make sure you check out the show notes for a link back to that episode if you missed it. But today, we're diving deeper into the technical aspects of the business broking industry. Antonia and I discuss recent changes to the REIQ business sale contract and what has guided these revisions. We will also look into the possible future changes and how these changes may impact the industry. Antonia also shares some suggested best practices for business brokers in Queensland in the context of these recent changes. Now, this episode is packed with valuable insights and information that you won't want to miss, especially if you're a business broker in Queensland. So sit back, relax, and here we go with part two of this two-part series. Let's talk about some changes that we've seen recently in the REIQ contract. Now, I just want to preface this by saying I'm a huge believer in state-based standard form contracts. I think they make the process of acting, and we act on hundreds and hundreds of business sales and acquisitions each year. So we deal with the REIQ contract and the other state-based contracts very, very regularly. And I love this concept. I think it's a really good thing for a deal, and particularly deals under that $2 million size, to have something where we've got terms and conditions that are being set out, and all we're negotiating is the special conditions, which is a much shorter component. So I have to preface this by saying I'm a huge believer in this as a process, and I believe good processes relate to good, create good outcomes. So let's talk about where the REIQ contract is and the reason for changes, and then, what's on the horizon.
Yeah, well, look, I would say it's challenging to create a standard business sale contract, as
Yes.
you would appreciate and many of your listeners would appreciate. So not all of the REIs actually put out a standard business sale contract. And look, the first thing I'll say about this is I don't ever pretend it's a perfect contract. It's far from that. None of our contracts are perfect. Our job is to try and create what I call a plain vanilla template that is trying to cater for the vast majority of transactions as best as we can. But it's not going to be fit for purpose on its own every time, if ever, in the case of a business sale, frankly. So I think that's really important to say. So, when people tell me, it doesn't do all of these things, my response is it can't do all of those things realistically, because as we've talked about many times during this interview, every business is quite different. So look, we've tried to improve it, still plenty of room for improvement. So if anyone's listening, always up for more feedback and insights into how we can improve it. But we just recently released a new version of it. And so I think some of the highlights, it was really time to modernize it. So we've made some changes to allow for electronic communication and of course electronic execution. We saw, as a result of COVID-19, there were some temporary legislative changes which are now enduring, thankfully. So that argument around can we do electronic signing, in particular where it's a corporate entity, I think that's been well established now. So we've made some provisions and some changes to reflect that. We've also updated some of the employee-related provisions. We've made some changes to verification of books and records. We had some feedback as well around our stock in trade and WIP, work in progress. So again, not vastly different, but some clarification just to remove any room for error. And as you can imagine, social media accounts are now part of a business sale. We hadn't contemplated those when we first developed that contract. So again, it's really important that we take those into account. They're part of that transfer process. So now the contract does contemplate that. We've also expanded our restraint of trade provision to protect goodwill. But again, I mean, when it comes to restraint of trade, again, what I'd say about that is our restraint of trade won't always be the right restraint of trade for every transaction, but it's in there and it might work. But we also know that in some instances ours will be struck out and a new one will be inserted. And then what we've also tried to do is develop some new special condition annexures. This is something that we're frequently asked for. Special conditions, again, they will change from transaction to transaction, but we do know that business brokers like having a special condition drafted because, of course, what we know is that whilst a business broker in Queensland is permitted to facilitate the contract and use, for example, a standard contract as we put out, we do know, though, that there's a limitation on that that doesn't extend, of course, to the drafting of special conditions. The Legal Profession Act is very clear about that. So I'm always telling both business brokers and real estate practitioners more generally, they are not to draft special conditions. So, of course, what they can do is use a special condition that we've drafted and just complete the necessary fields, or it doesn't have to be an REIQ special condition. You are, of course, permitted to use a special condition that a lawyer has drafted, provided that you don't start tinkering with it.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to note as well.
The one thing that I'd add in there, I worry sometimes about, and I know the approach of business brokers in Queensland, for example, is completely different to those in New South Wales and Victoria in relation to the interaction with the contract. So we have brokers in Queensland who will create the contracts, draft them, create them, and on the face of it, there's no issue with that. What I find is the practical issue, and something that I think becomes an educational component. So, I'm really glad that you raised it. The practical issue is that clients can see a contract, this contract with all the words in it and maybe even some sort of templated special conditions that a broker's had created or whatever they add into it. And then the client thinks that equals someone having looked at their business sale from a holistic perspective and having considered and understood what the relevant legal risks are for them in that transaction, particularly sell side, and this is where I find that we have this risk then that clients don't understand that there is so much more. When you look at a business sale transaction, whilst we have these documents like the standard form contracts here to enable us to more quickly and efficiently create the bones of the contract, it doesn't take away from the thinking that has to happen, which is sitting down and really understanding where are the risks, what happens with the employees, where are the entitlements, what's going to happen with them, how do we deal with personal leave and long service leave where they haven't hit the qualifying period, how do we deal with ensuring that we have this correct transfer of the value that sits in contracts, and all of those sorts of things,
and what the business actually encompasses.
Right.
So my view is you're only as good as your client's instructions. You don't know what you don't know, and yes, you're right. The client sometimes assumes that the business broker's role, the scope of the role, is inclusive of everything, and it's not. The business broker is there to facilitate the sale of that business. But and so, of course, a good business broker will ask a series of questions to make sure that they understand, what does this business include? Let me make sure that I am, when the time comes, putting together a contract that encompasses all of the elements of this business and that we haven't missed something. But at the end of the day, I mean, the client needs to take a responsibility. The vendor, the seller of the business, needs to be responsible. And, you know, if you think about vendor warranties, for example, or if you think about all sorts of things that are included in that contract, it is the vendor's responsibility to make sure that they've understood that contract. The business broker is not able to give legal advice about that contract. So what I always say, and look, it's a best practice recommendation from my perspective, is if you're going to be using the standard REIQ contract, or any contract for that matter, this isn't about me trying to plug our contract, I think it's a really good idea to give a copy of that document to the vendor and to recommend that they read it and that they get advice on it, because I do think clients don't understand the scope of the engagement of the business broker. It does not extend to giving them legal advice, and the business broker can't be a mind reader. Yes, you can sit there and ask questions and then provoke an answer. So tell me about this. What's involved in the business? Do you have licenses for this? Tell me about your employees. Tell me about the assets that the list goes on and on. So of course, it's your job to ask the questions, but at the end of the day, the vendor can't wash their hands of all responsibility. The business broker can only do what they can do based on the instructions that they are given. So a good business broker will ask the right questions to get the right answers. But again, the vendor does need to go in understanding that there is a level of responsibility that rests with them, notwithstanding that they have a business broker who's putting together the sale and affecting the sale for them. Yeah.
And I just think that can be one of the risks of business brokers, filling in the form and providing it to their clients of the sale contract, because the clients think this is the contract without realizing that there's so much more thought that needs to go into ensuring that, the special conditions or whatever, everything has been included. And some of these things, business brokers just won't have that detailed understanding of things which are essentially, complex legal issues because, that's not their job. Their job is to get, the business out there and sold.
Well, you're not selling a property where you can go do a title search and find out what's registered on the title, and then all right, you still have to ask about unregistered encumbrances, but you can work out most of it by looking at the title or going and researching certain things on different websites. A business isn't like that. There's not like a register of all businesses and you can go there and go, oh, well, this is great. This tells me exactly what I'm being engaged to sell, right? Doesn't work. It doesn't work
that would be handy
way.
if we had
it
that.
Would be,
yes.
It would be handy. It would be handy. All right, we'll put that on our to-do list.
Well, that leads me perfectly, actually, Antonia, to my next question, which is what's in the future for this REIQ business sale contract? Are there future changes? There were things on the list that you want to tackle?
Yeah, look, here's what I'd say about that. I think it's really important that as an organisation, first of all, it's a contract that we put together, but it needs to serve the business broker community. So what I would say is, even if I think about the most recent amendments we've made those changes based on feedback that we've had from business brokers or legal practitioners. So I think in terms of what the future changes look like, that needs to be dictated to a large extent by the business broking community, and of course then us as the peak body. It's our job to make sure that we're thinking about what are the legislative changes that are happening around Queensland or around Australia even potentially, and how do they relate to business sales, and do we need to actually go in and update that contract. So something we've been doing, I think, quite well is working hand in hand with the AIBB. I'm the first to admit we're the Real Estate Institute of Queensland, so we serve a variety of sectors. and look, I accept the criticism that we are focused mostly on property. That's true. I won't say it's not true. The business broking community is absolutely important. But as you can appreciate, it is a smaller community, and it's quite a niche area. And so, look, we've been trying to do a better job of rolling out educational programs and events that are actually more relevant to business brokers. It's something that we're committed to doing. We want to be delivering, I guess, events and educational programs that are bespoke. A business broker doesn't want to be sitting in a classroom learning about how to fill out a contract for the sale of residential property. That's offensive. Like, they've got better things to do with their time. So I think we are doing a better job of working hand in hand with the AIBB. Last year, we ran an event together, which was really great. And they are an organisation that is wholly and solely focused on the business broking community, which is outstanding. And so I think, hopefully we can complement their work, and they can definitely complement our work. I think there's room for both of us. So we've just recently rolled out best practice guidelines, I feel really happy about this because we touched earlier on. I mentioned that the threshold educational qualification has very, very little content in there for business brokers, and similarly, there's not a lot out there for business brokers. So what we've done is we've put together these best practice guidelines, again, working hand in hand with our business broking chapter to develop a series of guidelines for how to actually facilitate a business sale transaction and how to act for a client, adopting best practice principles. And so we're not saying, some of those things overlap with statutory requirements, but in many instances we're saying, hey, this is what it looks like to deliver those services to this standard. And so what we want to do is ideally, and again, we worked with AIBB on the development of those guidelines, and that's not a process where we go tick, we can put that to bed now forever. That's a document that needs to be regularly reviewed. At least once a year, we need to be getting it out, dusting the cobwebs off and working out, okay, time's marched on. What do we need to do? What should we be recommending? So I'm really excited about that because that's got a lot of really great content. And again, I think it's a really good place for us to be trying to get some consistency in approach when it comes to business broking, because even though business brokers do come under the Property Occupations Act, like we've already talked about, beyond the appointment process, there's not a heck of a lot in there that ultimately relates to business broking. And I'd like us to become better and better at delivering bespoke articles, materials, training resources for business brokers. We've got a commitment from the Palaszczuk government to introduce mandatory CPD. So I think there's an opportunity there for us to be, hopefully, the leading provider of that CPD training, and really making sure that we're not asking business brokers to, again, complete a course that has absolutely no relevance to what they do. It'd be unfair. So I think those are the things that we're focused on at the moment.
Great. Okay, wonderful. And I guess my last question, what sort of feedback, what sort of commentary do you hear from business brokers? Like, what does that interaction look like? Do they contact REIQ when they've got problems? And when they've got problems, what are those problems? Or how are business brokers engaging with you, I guess?
Yeah, look, definitely predominantly through that chapter process. We meet with our chapter once a quarter. Having said that, the chair of that chapter will deal with our chapter chair, obviously, on a more regular basis. We worked with a select few on the amendments to the contract, and then obviously that went back to the full chapter. So that would I would say would be the primary communication channel between the REIQ and the chapter. They give us guidance on articles we should be writing, the content of events and training. It was interesting, actually. Just recently we held a career networking evening, and we had the chair of our chapter there, and it's really interesting because, again, to hear him talk about business broking, you'd see people in the room who'd probably been thinking, oh well, I've got my qualification and I'll go off and do sales, or I might enter into commercial and industrial. And you could see people in the room as he was talking about what it means to be a business broker. You could really see people in the room responding to that and going, oh, that sounds really interesting. I had no idea that this was an opportunity, that this was a career pathway that I could be looking at. So I'd like us to do more to educate the community about what it is to be a business broker and how fascinating and interesting a career it can be. So I think that's something we need to be doing more and more of.
Exciting. Well, the future is indeed very, very exciting. I just want to say a huge thank you for coming onto the podcast, Antonia. And look, if any of our listeners who are business brokers want to engage with REIQ, how do they find out more?
Yeah, well, look, we'd love to hear from them. We've got a website, REIQ.com, obviously tells you a bunch of information about us, but we've got a really friendly team here who, if you wanted to give us a call, we could have a chat to you about how to become a member, what we've got coming up for business brokers. We've got a library, if you like, or a repository of material in our member resources section that people can get access to. So either give us a call or jump online and check out some information. We'd love to hear from you. If people are interested in joining the Business Brokers chapter, we'd also love to hear from them. We've got a great group of people in that chapter, but it's a 2-year term, and there's always, I think this is our 2nd year actually, so their term ends at the end of this year, and we'll be calling for nominations, I think around September if I'm not mistaken. So if there are any business brokers out there listening in Queensland who would like an opportunity to have a voice and a say, then I would encourage them to reach out to us or to put their hand up when the time comes.
Fabulous. Well, look, a huge thank you for coming on to the podcast. We'll, of course, link straight through to you in our show notes. So if you are running along the beach at the moment or driving into work, please don't have an accident. Don't worry, you can go back and click into your show notes to click through that. You don't need to write it down. Antonia, can I just say a huge thank you for coming onto the podcast today?
Oh, that's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Deal Room podcast. We hope you're now primed for your next deal with these pointers and have enjoyed these fascinating insights. Now, if you'd like more information about this topic, then head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com, where you'll be able to download a transcript of this episode, as well as access any contact details and any other additional information we referred to in today's podcast. Now, if you'd like to get in contact with our guests today and the services they offer, you can go ahead and check out our show notes for a link right through to them and their details. You can also book in directly with our legal eagles at Aspect Legal if you'd like to soundboard your next steps, discuss a legal question, or find out more how we can assist, whether that's with buying or selling a business, or perhaps somewhere in between. Now, don't forget to subscribe to the Deal Room podcast on your favourite podcast player to get notifications whenever a new episode is out. We'd also love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review and rating if you're already one of our subscribers, or even if you're listening to this podcast for the very first time. Every review helps our team produce valuable content for you. Well, thanks again for listening in. You've been listening to Joanna Oakey and the Deal Room podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. See you next time. I am so very excited to announce that I've hit a non-podcast related milestone and released a book. You might wonder why? Simple. I wanted to help business owners understand the mechanics of deal making and the interaction between 3 critical phases of business: acquisition, growth, and exit. And so I am very happy to announce Buy, Grow, Exit, a guidebook for business owners and their advisors on how to buy, grow, and guess what, exit in a way that maximizes value and avoids landmines along the way. The book is available now, so just head over to buygrowexit.com.au to get your copy and to access a whole heap of free resources that will really help you on your journey of acquisition, growth, and exit in your business or in working with your clients. Also, check out our show notes where we will link straight through to that page.
Ladies and gentlemen.
That will conclude this evening's entertainment.
Thanks for listening to the Deal Room Podcast. To find out more about this episode and other episodes in the series, check out the show notes or head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com.au.